a programmer's mindset is an activist mindset. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, and ooh, this echo is brutal.
Okay.
Did something change? Oh, okay. If you can still hear me, that's much better. Yeah, as alluded to in that little Twitter snippet, I really do, and having taught many hundreds, probably many thousands of beginners, I really do believe that this pretty fundamental change happens in your brain when you learn how to program. Sort of as I alluded to before, learning how to program is this experience of mastering a system that you know that you can change. And actually, if you step back and you think about this is not something that's been true for most of humanity. Like this is very much a mindset that comes out of the free software movement. And so I think it's very relevant to this hackathon today or this weekend. So that like the free software movement taught a generation of programmers that if we abide by the free software principles, like we have the ability to inspect the source code for software that we run, and we can change it to make it better, and we can redistribute it so other people can benefit from it. And we kind of take that for granted today. Like people are like our age and younger take for granted today that like most of the software that we interact with actually has these properties. Like we're very used to using open source software and contributing to it, or free software and contributing to it. So this mindset that you have the ability to write code to solve problems and to change the libraries and the language to solve the problems that you need to solve is a very, very powerful mindset. And I call it an activist mindset because if you've convinced yourself that you can master one of these systems and then change it, if you can generalize that to other systems, like in particular people systems like maybe government, that's a very powerful way to position yourself in the world. Like this belief that you can change things in the world to make it better is not a belief that most people have, and it's a belief that programmers somewhat develop naturally just by virtue of like going through our lives solving problems with software. So it's a very, very powerful mindset, and what I try to encourage people to do, in particular beginners that I'm teaching, is to have that experience with programming, but then to generalize it to other domains. It's like, great, you can write a program to solve a problem. Like, what are other problems in the world that need solving? You can solve those too. Hello?
All right, sorry about that. So going off of that, if you had one call to action for students attending HackIllinois, what would it be?
Yeah, well, it's an interesting question today. Like at this point in time in 2017, I have to admit that like current political events in the United States rather dominate my mind today, and I think that for people who have the luxury and privilege of spending time like worrying about these problems, I think most people in this room have that level of luxury and privilege. Potential for some pretty dangerous things, and I think that us, like people in this room, are very well equipped to actively engage with these problems, and I'd argue that we actually have a social obligation to do that. So if I could ask for one thing from people in this room, it's like look at the world around you and maybe what's going on politically, and ask yourself if there's a way to actively participate in a way that you think will make the world better. And it's like regardless of your personal political beliefs, if you don't do something about what's going on, nobody else will. So my call to action would be to very actively engage with what's going on like in the world, and in particular in the US today. And this could be through a direct application of one's software skills. There are many open source projects that are trying to make the tools of engaging with government easier and more transparent. Sort of further ahead, there are ways to, like one can have a full-time job like developing software in government or in local governments to make government more efficient or better at engaging with its constituents. But even aside from like directly utilizing one's software skills, like if you've never been to a protest, this would be a great year to do that.
Awesome. So it's no secret that you've done a lot for diversity, especially in the Python community, and in general for computer science and open source communities. And so based on your experience, what tactics have and haven't worked in the Python community for increasing diversity?
Yeah, well, so this is a topic that's I've developed. I've spent a lot of my adult life paying attention to. So I could probably write a novel on it. Maybe just as some background context. So my experience with this has come through a couple of primary initiatives. One was as an organizer for the Boston Python user group. So I did that for several years while living in Boston, and during that tenure, the group actually grew to become the largest Python user group in the world, due in large part to a bunch of very concerted efforts to bring beginners into the user group, and in particular women. And sort of the claim to fame statistic from that is we were able to bring the representation of women in the user group events from 1% to 15%, and then to sustain it at 15% for several years. So that's statistic number one. And then number two is PyCon, which is a large annual Python conference, sort of had a similar diversity problem in that roughly 1% of speakers were women 6 years ago. And through some very concerted efforts, we were able to bring that number from 1 to 7 to 11. And then most recently in 2016, 41% of speakers at PyCon were women, which is a fairly unprecedented number for a conference of that size and prestige. And it's really become a playbook, like the tactics have become a playbook for open source conferences all over the world to use. And so it's like, what are the tactics that have worked to start with? So tactics for the Boston Python user group that got diverse people into the community really focused on creating a pipeline starting with beginners. So creating content that was tailored for first-time programmers learning to program in Python, and then advertising those events as being particularly focused on and welcoming to people of diverse backgrounds, and in particular women, was a very effective way to get new people in for that initial event. But then you really need to have a pipeline of events. Like, you can't engage with someone just once. You need to have a pipeline of touch points through beginner and then intermediate content, and then into general user group events to retain people in a community. So it's not just that initial engagement. The retention part tends to be the hard part. And then with PyCon, and lots of people ask me how we achieve what seem like very outlier and staggering numbers for speakership at PyCon. And what's really funny is that there's absolutely no magic to any of this. It's just like putting in the hours of work. So first, PyCon has some important properties like scaffolding that will benefit having a diverse speakership. And this includes like having a reputation for having diverse content that will be interesting to people of a broad range of backgrounds and experience levels. It includes having a code of conduct. It includes having often childcare. So there's some scaffolding here that makes it more likely for diverse people to be interested in the conference and then able to attend. But then in terms of actually getting lots of talk proposals by women, the totally unmagical way that this works is that I and many other dedicated volunteers literally send hundreds of emails to women who have been a part of the Python community in various capacities, encouraging them to submit talks. So if you look at my email outbox during the call for proposals window, it's literally me sending hundreds of emails, like individual emails, customized emails to people who would be great talk submitters. And as it turns out, if you have this sort of welcoming environment and then you do a lot of direct outreach, that works. Like, that works for engaging people with the talk proposal submission process. Yeah, so the tactics that tend to work are like build a pipeline, often starting with beginners, and then direct out, like basically rolling up your sleeves and putting in the work of direct outreach. Those are the two things, as far as I can tell, those are actually the only two things that work for getting folks from populations that you're not already well serving into a community. A really important thing to say here is that most of the outreach in open source communities has very much started with and ended with outreach to women. And it's important to recognize that like that is not the only diversity axis, and like it's important for the Python community to be, and the Python like developer community and people contributing to Python, the language and libraries, to be reflective of the very diverse international audience that uses the language. And so I think the real sort of nuts still to be cracked by open source community organizers is how to translate this outreach for women that has been pretty successful to other demographics. And this is hard because it involves you have to be able to measure these things to know how you are doing. Like if you need to be able to measure things to be able to set goals and then to know how you're doing. And it can feel very awkward to sort of like assign properties to people so that you can measure them. But as far as I can tell, measuring these things is a precondition to actually successfully changing any of the numbers. Yeah. So things that work, pipelines, starting with beginners, direct outreach and all of the work that implies, and then being willing to measure things and then set goals against those measurements. So those are things that work. And again, like it's very important. We're sort of still in the early days of having a robust way of engaging with diverse populations other than along the gender axis. Okay, that was the start of an answer, but I could go on for like hours. So if I welcome any follow-up questions on that. Oh, things that don't work involve examples of things that don't work include like failing to have a code of conduct and then wondering why nobody wants to go to your conference, and like pleading into the internet ether for diverse folks to apply to your conference. Like direct outreach is much more effective than any amount of like well-intended but undirected outreach. Also, don't be an asshole. That's a really great way to prevent people from wanting to work with you. As someone who's like a formal kernel developer, like the Linux community continues to be like a fabulous example of an environment that will not welcome people of diverse backgrounds. So there.
Awesome. So one last question before we open it to the audience. It's also a large part of your life has been revolving around entrepreneurship. You've been a part of 2 startups and acquisitions and recently founded another company. So why this path in life and not something else?
Yeah, yeah, it's a good question. And so actually my first degree is actually in chemistry. So like I was not a wonderkind computer programmer baby. Like I really picked this up in college. And the reason that I picked up computer science and programming was sort of calling back to the earlier video, like this realization in watching a lot of my friends who were taking computer science classes, like realizing that they were really learning a general toolkit full of tools for solving a broad range of problems in the world. And that feeling very powerful. And to be honest, like much more powerful than the sort of history of chemistry that I was going through in my undergraduate chemistry classes. So the appeal of computer science like didn't really hit me until college, but when it hit me, it hit me pretty hard. And then why this path through startups? I would say that it was somewhat accidental to begin with, but I've built up like a very intentional path since leaving college. And I'll explain what I mean by that. So it was, so startups, I think, were an accidental path in the sense that I happened to have a good group of, like a close group of friends. We were all in MIT Student Computing Club together. And they happened to be starting a company around the master's thesis of a good friend of mine named Jeff. And that company became Ksplice, which built this technology for rebootless kernel updates on Linux. And I joined them out of university because the technology was cool and because they were good friends of mine. And those are like 2 really great properties for the first thing that you're doing out of school. And then we ended up being pretty good at startups. Like that company was acquired by Oracle. And actually this same group of people, we stayed at Oracle for basically a year, left and started company number 2, which was this real-time collaboration startup. And that company was acquired by Dropbox. And now we're on to company number 3. And so it's been the same team through all of these startups and acquisitions. But I've had this really wonderful density of experiences. But the thing that I have realized over time that has made me sort of stick with this path is, as you can probably tell from the earlier conversations and from the video, I have like a pretty strong activist bent and like a strong belief in like me having an obligation to engage, like to use my relatively high level of privilege to like engage with important problems in the world, engage with government, and engage with activism, engage with education and other, like the media and other big influential sort of careers and arenas in the world. And so my belief about this is that, like, the way, if I think about how to maximize my impact in these areas over all time, so like having an influence is around technology and education that I care about, for example. So the way for me to maximize my impact in these domains across all time, I think, given where I am today and given where I was 5 years ago, is to build up a level of business and technology credibility that makes me a person that like real people in government and nonprofits will pay attention to. So like my plan for my life, and I could be full of shit and this could change in 10 years, but like my current best plan is to continue building up business credibility and technology credibility through these startups and acquisitions until I get to the point where I can leverage that credibility in a really productive way. And that could look like running for public office. This could look like being a technical advisor at some level of government. This could look like running a nonprofit. It could look like being a YouTube star that people listen to because you're sufficiently famous. Like, I'm open-minded about what the path is through all of this, but like my general plan is through these startups, business credibility, technology credibility, and leveraging that for impact in activist areas that I care about. And I didn't know that when I was 20, but I feel a pretty strong conviction about this today.
Awesome. So now if anybody in the audience has a question, I will pass the mic to them. Anybody?
I'm an open book.
Hi, Jessica. It's Carol.
Oh, hi, Carol.
We're having a blast here in Illinois. This is the greatest bunch of students, and the Python room has totally rocked. We've got Matthew Turk and Katie Huff and Todd and a bunch of other folks, so it's been a really, really good time. So let's look at education for a second, because you know how near and dear that is to my heart. What do you think in the next 2 years would be something within the Python community that we could do to improve both education in the US as well as beyond?
Sure. And I have like a meta answer to this question, which is independent of Python. I think it's probably pretty obvious to people in the room, and I think it's increasingly obvious to like educators and politicians, that having a basic level of digital literacy, and then probably even on top of that, some level of opportunity to develop programming skills should be something that every student in high school, if not earlier, should have. And also in college, like basic programming and software engineering skills end up being so useful in many disciplines that it might also make sense for there to be some required classes in a variety of disciplines related to programming and software engineering. So like the single greatest thing, so those things are all true. And then another fact that is very sad is that the most gender skewed advanced placement class in the US is computer science. So we have a little bit of a problem right now, which is that very few students in high school have access to computer science classes. Very few have access to any sort of digital literacy class. And also we have the most, like, computing classes tend to be the most gender skewed classes in high schools. The way to fix this is to require everyone to take a digital literacy class, and potentially even require that everyone take a programming class. And if you weigh this against other required classes like chemistry or physics or like various social studies classes, I think a compelling argument can be made that a digital literacy class is equally important, if not more important, as some of these required classes. And if we had to make trade-offs about which ones are required, a digital literacy class would make the cut. So, like, the single greatest thing that could happen, which maybe could be advocated for by the Python community and other communities, would be to make a digital literacy class required and to make opportunities to learn how to program much more prevalent in high schools. How can the Python community specifically contribute to that? I would say by partnering with high school curriculum developers to develop content for high school programming classes that really make a diverse set of people fall in love with programming. So I know, like, when I took my first computer science class in high school, it was in C++, and it was pretty awful because it takes a while to be able to do anything interesting in C++. Like, you have to learn all of this other crap, and you learn about classes and everything. You know, C++ or in Java, you have to learn all of this stuff before you can do anything that's fun. And that's a real turnoff for most people who might take a computing class. So I think a way that a concrete way that the Python community can help is to partner with educators to develop a high quality set of materials, make the very earliest days of programming for beginning programmers very fun and engaging in an interdisciplinary way that will appeal to people of diverse backgrounds. That would be the number one thing that I would ask for or recommend.
That's awesome. When are we starting? Uh-oh.
Anybody else?
Okay, should I ask her a question? Other than.
Hi, so I had a question about your journey through various startups. Did you ever think that you needed some sort of, training in management or, just some background in business to make a startup a successful business? Or is that something you recommend to others?
Yeah, great question. So all of these companies, because it's been the same group of people, so Ksplice and Zulip and this new company, they've all been founded by folks who have computer science backgrounds, so nobody with a formal business background. And I definitely think that it's possible to build products that solve real needs for people without having a formal business background. A major pitfall that some tech-founded companies do run into is that they can sometimes forget who their users are and overfit for themselves or people who are as technical as them. So I'd say that you don't need a business background per se, but you do have to either have or figure out a way to develop a level of honesty and rigor and empathy for who your actual users are and what problem you are actually solving. And make sure that you don't overfit for people who are already technologists in the software that you're building. So no, I don't think you need a business degree. Maybe it's great to have one on a team. It's certainly possible to be successful without one, though. But don't let yourself fall into the trap of overfitting for tech nerds.
Okay, so let's continue along the topic of entrepreneurship. So through all these three startups, what kind of lessons have you learned? What can you pass on to maybe the next generation of entrepreneurs?
Sure, I've learned many lessons. A couple of buckets. So I think we've learned I and the team have learned a lot about how to develop products that people actually want. We've learned a lot about management. We've learned a lot about like ourselves and how we work together as a team. And we've learned this lesson that we just in from the previous question about like the dangers of overfitting for you and people that you understand really well and not understanding your general user enough. Maybe specific. Let me think about specific lessons from this. I mean, maybe relevant to this audience. I mean, I'm so fortunate to have met this group of people in school who have been with me through my entire career at this point. I would say, like, really don't underestimate the value and the importance of the network that you're building while you're in school. And make a point of building the reputation that you want to be building for yourself. Like, build a reputation for being a great technologist and someone who's great to work with, because the people who you are meeting today and in the next couple of years, like, they may very well be the people that you're working with for the rest of your lives. So, like, an emphasis on building, yeah, the importance of building a network of people while you are in school cannot be overstated. That's one, like, topical lesson for this group. Yeah, I'm happy to answer more specific questions, but you learn a lot about yourself and your founding team as you start companies. A joke from my co-founders and I is that there's like a fixed maximum level of happiness that is shared between the four of us at any given time. And so, like, at any given time, two of us are really happy and two of us are really sad, because building a company tends to be an emotional roller coaster. And this causes you to learn a lot about yourself and to really, learn how to work with each other. So there's a level of management of oneself and management of one's founding team that becomes really important for being able to build products successfully together. So, like, don't underestimate the people parts of building a company. Oh, also, like, nothing matters if you build something that people actually want. Like, people really sweat, like, should I do Y Combinator or not? Or, like, does it matter who our early investors are, or what domain name we have? Like, people sweat all of these details that super don't matter if you've actually built something that people want. If you building something that people want, it's going to be successful, and haven't built something people want. It doesn't, like, none of the other stuff matters. Like,
Sorry, you broke up a little bit there. So anybody have anything on that? So kind of in this in your kind of your whole life experience, what has been the one event that has impacted you most in terms of any of the things you care about, whether it's your companies or your outreach or your work in the Python community?
is a lot, and And so I called Unlock Clubhouse, set of longitudinal about computer science program, and it dissects a lot of stuff around diversity and diversity retention in college computer science programs. But this book was really transformative for me because it introduced a term called imposter syndrome, which I think many or most people know about today, but I hadn't heard about it until I read this book. And learning this term was really transformative for me because it gave a name to a thing that I had experienced a lot in college, in particular being this person who had less programming background coming into college than a lot of my peers. So reading that book was transformative for me. But so going through college and then this first job out of school, so joining my friends at this company, Ksplice, this company for rebootless kernel updates on Linux, that was a really moment for me because it felt very validating of all the work that I had put into catching up to my peers. So these very smart people who were friends of mine, who've been doing this for a lot longer than me, really could have started their company with anybody else, but they chose to start it with me. And that really felt like having emerged into my own as a software engineer. So that was a very validating and important moment for me. And then maybe related to that, this isn't like a point in time that was pivotal, but this, like the fact that I felt like a beginner in a room full of experts for part of my college life, I think instilled in me a very profound sense of empathy for beginners that I have tried very hard to retain to this day, and has really motivated a lot of the work that I do and the content that I've developed for beginners, in particular in the Python community. So like this idea of remembering what it felt like to be a beginner and how uncomfortable that felt, and really remembering that and having that empathy as I work with beginners, I think has been very important to me in the work that I've done.
Oh, that's great. We also apologize that we couldn't hear the name of the book. What was the name of the book that you said?
Oh, I'm sorry. It's called Unlocking the Clubhouse.
Cool. So I guess my question for you is, you're very involved in activism, and especially your work with the computer realm. And so I was wondering, how do you find that like happy balance between the two?
Yeah. So work-life balance and like a balance between the work that you do for yours is super important. And I have to admit that this is not something that I'm still working on. I tend to work, if I'm not working on my company, I tend to be working on these open source initiatives that I care about. And so when people ask me what I do for fun, I tend to say that I do work for fun. So I want like in the communities that I develop and in the companies that I run, it's important to me that the people who participate in them have the opportunity for the that they want. But I myself am not very good at this, and I tend to work a lot because I like it. So it's a little bit of a do as I say, not as I do. Like, how do I balance these things? I'm not very good at it.
Okay, that's actually really surprising. Sounds like you're always working like a college student. I guess so. My next question would be, how do you find the motivation? Because like obviously you must deal with a lot of like sometimes burnout, or just sometimes like it's not exactly as you want it to turn out. So where do you find that motivation from?
Yeah. Well, I think if you're working on something that you think is important, that produces a motivation that can be pretty unfailing if it's important to you. So like if you can work on something that is important to you, and you can do this in an environment where you feel very supported by your friends and family, like that is the recipe, I think, to do really good work in a really sustainable way. So if you have the opportunity and perhaps the luxury to work on something that's really important to you, and not everybody does, like people got to pay the bills, but if you can work on something that you really care about and that you think is important, and you can do it in an environment that's going to be great for relationships outside of the work that you're doing.
Sorry, Jessica, you broke up a little bit at the end. Could you repeat what you said and turn off your video for a little bit, just so the audio comes through clear?
Or a better connection.
Sure, let's see if I can do that. Sure, I'm not sure, well, okay. I guess in summary, I'm not sure how much broke up. If you're working on something that you really believe is important, and you're able to do it in an environment where you have a lot of support from the people around you, so your friends and family, that is a really good recipe for doing great work in a sustainable way. And I would also say that I think a lot of people find, I think not everyone, but a lot of people find as they careers and as they move through life, that the people aspects of what they're doing become increasingly important. So like technology for technology's sake is very sustaining and motivating for some people, but I think increasingly for people, most people as they go through their lives, like the people portion, like who is like the fact that benefiting from the work that you are doing, like it's making a difference in their lives, that part becomes increasingly motivating for most people. And also the people that you're able to do that work with. Like the value of working with people who you trust and respect, I think tends to only go up.
All right, does anybody have any last questions? Sure.
So what attracted you to the Python community? Was it the community itself, or something about the language that stood out to you, or something else entirely?
Yeah, so I learned Python in school. I had become familiar. It was also in my FIP, and so that's like background. But it was I would say that so I love the language and I love the community. Alluding to the Twitter clip at the beginning, it was also just like a convenient platform for running experiments on diversity outreach because it was a community that was fairly receptive to those experiments. So in Boston with the Boston Python user group, we wanted to it was really an experiment. Like we wanted to run an experiment on an effective way to sustainably engage beginners of diverse backgrounds, in particular women. And we had to pick some language to do this in. And the combination of Python generally being on the progressive side about these types of diversity outreach initiatives and it being a language that I knew made it the sort of obvious choice. But yeah, it's like a good example though of the compounding benefits of having a community that like really makes an effort to position itself as being welcoming. Because I could have done this, maybe I could have gone and done this in the Ruby community instead. I don't know, or in the C++ community. But like this prior reputation for being progressive about this was a part of why we picked this language and not something else.
All right, so that was the last question for Jessica. Let's thank her for her time and
Thank you all so much. I'm sorry that the audio hopefully wasn't too choppy.
Nope. All right. And if you had any closing words for the mentors and mentees in this audience, what would they be?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so calling back to earlier, you have a set of skills, like you're developing a set of skills and a network that make you uniquely privileged in this world to do great things, like apply that privilege to good use. Like there are a lot of big problems in the world. Some of these can be solved by technology and some of them can't. But no one's going to solve them if you all don't. So my call to action for all of you is to like use this hackathon as an opportunity to meet people and to exercise those skills. But like don't forget that there are real problems in the world that need solving.
Awesome. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you. Take care, everyone.